Hey, tonight, I'd like to share something soft, slow, and full of stillness. A story that isn't just meant to be heard, but felt. A story that floats gently like wind through trees. If you find comfort here, if these words help you rest at the end of a long day, I'd love for you to subscribe. That way, each night you can return, and I'll be right here with another quiet tale. So now, close your eyes if you'd like. Let your body grow heavy. Let your thoughts soften, and I'll begin. The story begins. Seamless, flowing narrative. There was once a time, not quite long ago, and not quite now either, when the sky wore softer colors and the wind spoke a language forgotten by most. In a land wrapped gently by hills and fog, there lived a girl named Mira. She had eyes like dusk, not quite light, not quite dark, and a heart that always seemed to listen. Mira lived in a small home at the edge of a sleepy forest, where wildflowers leaned against the walls, and the roof was always warm from the sun. But the forest, oh, the forest, it whispered to her. Not with fear, with invitation. It called to her like an old friend, every time the stars blinked awake. And one evening, without quite knowing why, Mira stepped beyond her garden gate and followed the hush of the woods. Her feet found the moss without effort. The air felt cooler here, not cold, but curious. Trees swayed, not from wind, but from breath, like they were alive, dreaming beside her. She walked deeper. The sky above grew darker, not heavy, but deep, like velvet. And in that velvet sky, a single star flickered once, then again, but not where it was supposed to be. It pulsed, like a heartbeat, and Mira, somehow, understood. She kept walking, past streams that sang in sleep, past stones with stories etched into them by time, until the world around her quieted completely. Even the wind had paused. She came to a place where the forest opened into a vast field of light. But the light didn't come from above. It glowed from the ground. Tiny specks of brightness, like the memories of stars, floated just above the grass. Mira sat down in the middle of that glow. She didn't ask where she was. She didn't need to. Some part of her already knew. And when she closed her eyes, the earth beneath her felt warm, and the stars whispered stories directly into her bones. Not with words, with knowing. That was the first night she dreamed without pictures. Only feeling. When morning arrived, if it could be called morning at all, Mira opened her eyes to a sky that had no sun, only light. Soft, quiet light that came from somewhere she couldn't see. She wasn't in her world anymore, but she wasn't frightened. The air here hummed gently. Far ahead, on the edge of the glowing field, she saw something move slow, like a shadow that had forgotten its shape. And so, once again, Mira walked. But this time, the ground beneath her didn't crunch or shift. It welcomed her. Each step felt like being carried. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't need to. Because here, in this place made of stillness and memory, everything had its own gentle rhythm. Even her heartbeat slowed to match it. The figure she had seen from afar was no longer just a shadow. As Mira stepped closer, she realized it was made of the same light that drifted through the field, not solid, not air, but something in between. A presence, calm and ancient, like the hush before snowfall. It had no face, no name, yet when it turned toward her, she felt known. You came because you heard the calling, it said. Or perhaps the words never passed through air at all. They arrived directly in her mind, like a memory she had never lived. Mira nodded without speaking. The figure reached out a gesture more symbolic than real, and a soft hum pulsed through her chest. You've crossed into the space between, it said. Few come here with clear eyes. You must rest and remember. I don't know what I'm supposed to remember, Mira whispered. The figure tilted gently, like a bow of kindness. You will. Then, just as gently as it had appeared, the light began to drift, dissolving into the air around her, leaving behind only the soft echo of warmth in her ribs. Mira sat again, in the quiet, watching the field breathe light in slow waves. Time, here, had no meaning. It passed like wind passes through silk, present but invisible. As she closed her eyes again, sleep didn't take her, it welcomed her, like an old friend opening the door. Now she was walking, but not in the field. This place was higher, colder. She was on a narrow path carved into a mountainside, where clouds rolled just below her feet like soft rivers. The sky here was darker, inkier, yet filled with glowing patterns, constellations she had drawn once as a child. And on either side of her path, small lanterns floated. They didn't burn. They shimmered. Each one pulsed faintly as she passed, like a heartbeat or like someone sighing in sleep. Ahead, a structure rose from the mist. It wasn't quite a tower, nor a temple. It looked like something that had always been there, even before the mountain knew its own shape. She stepped through its wide entrance, and the moment she did, every lantern around her stilled. Inside was a hall of silence. Not empty, just deeply quiet. Mira walked through it slowly. The walls shimmered with scenes, not paintings, but memories. She saw her mother holding her on a cold morning. She saw her first night alone, when she'd stared at the ceiling, whispering questions into the dark. She saw her drawings, constellations, notes, scattered thoughts dancing like fireflies across stone. Then one image pulsed brighter. It was the blinking star, the one that had brought her here. But now she could see it wasn't a star at all. It was a gate, a gentle tear in the sky, woven with silver threads. And behind that tear was a light she couldn't name. Not sun, not flame, just presence. She reached out, but before her fingers met the image, a voice, not the figures, but something older filled the hall. You've begun to remember, it said, slow as winter dusk. This place is not separate from your world. It lives beneath it, beside it, behind it. Mira lowered her hand. I don't understand. You don't need to, the voice replied. Not now. All that matters is that you stay, listen, rest. And so she did. She sat once more beneath the image of the star that was a gate and breathed. The hall grew dimmer, the air warmer. The memory faded not with fear but with comfort. She was no longer searching. She had found the place inside the sky where stars came to rest and dreams began again. Time, if it existed here at all, began to dissolve. The walls of the great silent hall softened into mist, not abruptly, but gently like a candle flickering lower before going out completely. Mira did not stand. She simply found herself elsewhere. She was now seated beside a stream, a silver thread winding through a pale blue meadow. The grass whispered under a sky that never changed. No sun, no moon, yet it glowed, softly and evenly, like twilight holding its breath. She dipped her fingers into the stream. It was neither cold nor warm, but the moment her skin touched the water, images rippled out, memories not just of her life, but of lives before hers. A hand planting seeds into rich earth, a child chasing a lantern across a wooden bridge, a voice singing a name no longer spoken. These weren't hers, yet they were. She understood now. The place she had entered was more than a dream. It was a resting place for all who had ever wondered. A pocket between worlds where memories returned not to be remembered, but to rest, to float freely without weight. And somehow, she had been allowed to see it. The wind shifted. From across the meadow came a low, rhythmic sound like drums played by trees, or thunder remembering how to speak. She followed it. Each step through the tall grass was lighter than the last. The trees here grew in slow spirals, their bark translucent like old glass. And between their roots, tiny lights flickered not like fireflies, but like breathing stars. Ahead, a clearing. In the center stood a creature tall, curved, its body flowing like water held in invisible hands. It turned to her without surprise. "You are deeper now," it said, not in greeting but in acknowledgement. Mira tilted her head. Deeper into what? The creature stepped aside, revealing a small pool behind it, still and black as night. But inside that water, stars moved. Not reflections, real stars. Tiny galaxies swirling, vanishing, reforming a living sky beneath the surface. "This," it said, "is the memory of all things that never became." Mira blinked. "What do you mean?" The creature bent beside the pool, letting its fingers hover above the surface. Every wish never spoken, every path never taken, every word thought, but not said. They rest here. They are not lost, only sleeping. Mira knelt beside the creature. She could see her own reflection now, not just her face, but many faces. Her face as a child, as someone older, as someone who had never been born. "So I'm dreaming?" she asked. The creature did not answer. Instead, it reached out and touched the water. A single ripple spread, and with it came a sound, faint, melodic, like someone humming from behind a veil. And then Mira heard it. Her own voice. Not from now, not from this place, but from far away, from her bed, calling gently, "Are you still there?" She looked up at the creature. "That was me." The creature nodded. "You are still sleeping, but now you are also remembering." Mira wanted to cry, but not from sadness, from a fullness the kind that only silence can explain. The creature stood and stepped back into the trees, fading like mist before morning. She was alone again, but she didn't feel alone. Not anymore. The stars in the water pulsed once more, and she knew it was time to keep walking. She didn't know how long she stayed there. The quiet didn't feel empty, it felt full, like the pause between heartbeats, like the silence just before snow touches earth. Then, somewhere deep in that hush, a sound stirred. Not loud, just a soft, steady rhythm like fingers tapping gently on glass. Mira opened her eyes. The hall had changed. Where the memory walls once shimmered, now stood doors. Dozens of them, each shaped slightly different, some tall and arched, others small and round like hobbit homes in fairy tales. All of them pulsed faintly, not to draw attention, but as if they were breathing in time with her. She rose and walked past them slowly. Her fingers hovered beside each one, waiting for something she didn't quite understand. Then, one door, a pale wooden one with ivy etched into its surface, grew warmer beneath her hand. A soft hum filled her chest again. This was the one. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. The door opened inward, not to a room, but to a memory she didn't recognize. It was nighttime. There were lanterns strung between trees, and a long table set with teacups and old books. The chairs were mismatched. Laughter floated through the air like dust in sunlight, even though she couldn't see where it came from. She stepped inside. The air smelled like cinnamon bark and stars. A breeze passed through, carrying whispers and languages she didn't speak, but understood anyway. As Mira walked along the table, she noticed each book was open to a page, not with words, but with moving images. Each one showed a different version of her. One was younger, chasing fireflies through her garden. Another was older, staring at the same blinking star through a telescope. Another was curled under a quilt, drawing galaxies into the margins of a school notebook. She stopped walking. Her chest felt tight, not in fear, but in recognition. These weren't fantasies. They were memories, but not only hers. Somehow, they belonged to the version of her that lived here, in this place beyond dreams. "You've walked many paths," came the soft voice again, not from behind her this time, but within. "And every step has brought you closer, not forward, inward." Mira turned slowly. There, at the head of the table, sat a small figure cloaked in moonlight. Not the same presence as before. This one felt familiar. It lifted its head, and though it had no face, Mira knew it was her. Not a reflection, not a mirror, but the part of her that had waited here patiently while she lived. "You left pieces of yourself behind," the figure said gently. "In books, in stars, in shadows, I've kept them safe." Mira took a step closer. "Why?" she asked. "So you'd remember how to come home." The figure rose, and in its hand appeared a small object, smooth, round, glowing softly. "A stone?" "No, a seed." It placed the glowing seed in Mira's palm. "This," it said, "is your stillness. You'll need it when you wake." Mira looked down. The seed pulsed gently, warm against her skin. "But I don't want to leave," she whispered. The figure nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding. "You don't have to, not all at once, but dreams, even the most beautiful ones, are meant to be carried, not escaped into." And with that, the lanterns along the trees began to dim, not suddenly, but like the end of a lullaby. The laughter faded. The table, the books, the forest all softened around her like breath misting on glass. And then she was standing once more in the hall of doors. Only now, there was just one door left, the one that led out. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she sat down beneath it, holding the seed gently in both hands. And slowly, she began to hum. Not a song she remembered, but one the stars had sung to her on that first night in the glowing field. A song not of endings, but of beginnings. The door didn't open. Not yet. Mira sat quietly beneath it, the seed still cradled in her hands. Its glow had dimmed now, not because it had faded, but because it no longer needed to shine so brightly. She could feel it, even with her eyes closed. like a heartbeat, like the hush of snow in the air. She breathed slowly, and with each breath, the space around her changed. The walls of the hall softened again, not into mist this time, but into starlight. Tiny threads of light, thousands of them, began to weave through the air like a great invisible loom. They moved with her breath, with her memory. She stood, not because someone told her to, but because the world itself had shifted gently, lovingly, as if inviting her to move again. The final door, the one that led out, no longer felt like an end. It felt like a passage, not away from this place, but with it. Mira stepped forward, still holding the seed, and as she did, the air around her began to hum again, deeper this time. A sound like stars aligning, like roots remembering where to grow. She placed her hand on the door. It was smooth beneath her fingers, cool, like polished stone kissed by moonlight. And then it opened, not with sound, with silence. Beyond the threshold was not her bedroom, not the world she'd left, not yet. Instead, it was the sky, a sky so vast and clear, it seemed to stretch forever, not above her, but around her. She was standing on nothing and everything. There were stars here, millions, maybe more, but they didn't blink. They listened, and in their quiet attention, Mira felt something return. Her name, not just the name people used, but the name the wind once whispered when she was born. The name the trees carried when they bloomed near her window. The name she had forgotten, but the stars never had. And in that moment, she wasn't just Mira. She was all the versions she'd seen. The child chasing light, the elder watching skies, the dreamer drawing galaxies into margins, the silence that held them together. Her chest opened not literally, but deeply, and the seed in her palm began to rise. It hovered just above her hand, glowing brighter now, pulsing like a tiny sun remembering its purpose. Then, gently, it drifted upward. It didn't float. It ascended, up into the starlit sky. And with it, something in Mira rose too. Not to leave, but to become. A soft wind moved through her then, the first breeze she'd felt since entering this place. It wasn't pushing her. It was lifting her. And somewhere, far away but growing closer, she could feel her body beginning to wake. But this time, she wouldn't be leaving anything behind. She was bringing it all with her. The sky around her shimmered not from light, but from memory. And then, as softly as a feather turning in still air, she began to descend. Not falling, not drifting, but returning. The stars stayed with her, not as distant points of light, but as quiet companions. They no longer needed to shine outside her, because now they glowed within her. The world reshaped itself gently. Grass beneath her feet. The scent of pine and night bloom again in the air. The hush of the forest, returning not as a mystery, but as a welcome. She stood once more in the field of light, the same one she had first found on that very first night. Only now, the glow was softer, steadier. The stars no longer floated above the grass. They had settled, like seeds into soil, waiting. She looked to the trees. They were watching her, though they did not move. Old friends who knew she'd changed, and yet somehow she was still the same. Somewhere nearby, an owl called low and slow. Not as a warning, as a blessing, Mira turned toward the path that led home. But before she took a step, she looked down at her hands. They were empty now. No seed, no stone, only warmth. The kind of warmth that lingers long after a fire goes out. The kind that says, "You were here, and you are still." She smiled just a little, the kind of smile that only someone who has seen stars resting in water can wear. Then she walked through the moss, past the sleeping stones, beneath the dreaming trees. And when she reached the edge of her garden once more, the sky above was beginning to shift. A deep blue, slowly softening the very first breath of morning. Still quiet, still sacred. She stepped inside. The wildflowers leaned toward her. The door creaked gently as it opened, like it too had been waiting. She didn't go to bed. She sat by the window, wrapped in a quilt stitched with time, holding nothing, but feeling everything. And as the first light of day touched the roof, Mira whispered, "I remember. Not what it looked like, not what it meant, but what it felt like. The quiet, the stars, the song, and the soft hum of stillness that now lived forever inside her."
The world moved around her now, but she did not rush to meet it. Birdsong began to thread softly through the trees, and the golden hush of dawn crept over the hills like warm tea spilling gently across the sky. Inside her, the silence remained not as emptiness, but as space. Space for breathing, for remembering, for being. She stood from her window seat, not hurried, just ready. She moved through her home the way water moves through roots, calm, patient, necessary. Every object she passed seemed to greet her in its own quiet way. The wooden floor sighed beneath her bare feet. The kettle smiled as it warmed. The cup, chipped at the rim, waited faithfully. She poured tea not for thirst, but for the ritual of it. Steam rose, and in that curl of warmth, she almost saw the shape of the figure she met in the forest, the one cloaked in moonlight, the one that was also her. A part of her would always walk in that other place where stars rested and memories floated freely. But this world, this quiet morning, was not separate. It was simply another room in the same house. She stepped outside once more, tea in hand. The forest no longer whispered with questions. Now it simply breathed with her. And in the sky, the last stars faded, gently not vanishing, just tucking themselves in until night returned. She smiled again, this time fully. And as the wind passed by, it carried something soft, a hum, maybe, or just the echo of her own soul singing back to her. A reminder, you have walked far, you have wandered deep, but the stars have not left you. They live in your stillness now. They rest in your remembering. Mira closed her eyes one last time before the day began. And in that perfect glowing pause between night and morning, she whispered to no one in particular, "Thank you for waiting for me."